45 years ago, when I was in graduate school in psychology, it was dangerous professionally and sometimes even personally to even talk about genetic influence. The behavioral sciences were completely dominated by environmentalism, the view that we are what we learn. And Blueprint is the culmination of my 45 years of research trying to understand the genetic and environmental causes of what makes us different, our nature and nurture. During these 4 decades, a mountain of evidence has built up from twin and adoption studies and now DNA that's convinced most scientists of the importance of a more balanced view that recognizes genetic as well as environmental influences. But in my book, I go further. I conclude that, and this is obviously controversial, that inherited DNA differences are the major force, systematic force, making us who we are as individuals, our personality, mental health and illness, and cognitive abilities and disabilities. Our experiences also matter, our friends, our family, school, but these experiences, I believe, don't change fundamentally who we are. What I'm saying is that if you were cloned and your clone was raised in a different family, went to a different school, had different friends, had a different job, that clone would still be very similar to who you are. And it isn't just a thought experiment. Those of you who have seen the film 3 Identical Strangers, it's a dramatic illustration of how identical triplets, intentionally separated and put in different environments, one lower class, one middle class, one upper class, are actually end up being very similar, not just physically, but also in personality and in mental health and illness. Now, this is just an anecdote. It's an illustration, though, backed up by hundreds of twin and adoption studies making this point, that inherited DNA differences are the major systematic force, making us who we are. Environmental effects are obviously important, but I believe they're largely idiosyncratic, not the systematic influences that is connoted by the word nurture. What looks like systematic environmental influences are often genetically mediated in that we make environments that are correlated with our genetic propensities. I know it's a lot to take on board, but it's described in the book. And it's important to emphasize this research describes what is the genetic and environmental differences that make a difference in our culture. So these findings do not lead to determinism. They describe what is, not what could be, which includes therapeutic interventions. Nonetheless, I think the importance of inherited DNA differences in explaining what makes us who we are call for a radical rethink of parenting and education and events that shape our lives. That was that slide. The most exciting reason for writing this book now is the DNA revolution, which is the topic of the second half of the book. The key has been to realize that these ubiquitous inherited influences aren't due to 1 or 2 major genes. We're talking about thousands of genes of very small effect size that affect all behavioral traits. And in just the last 3 years, it's become possible to harness these DNA differences in what's called polygenic scores that you've heard about earlier today to predict behavioral dimensions and disorders. Because inherited DNA differences don't change from the moment of conception, polygenic scores can predict problems from birth. And this unique predictive power of polygenic scores will promote interventions to prevent problems, rather than waiting until problems emerge and then trying to fix them. So I believe that this ability to read our DNA differences will transform science, society, and how we understand ourselves. Thank you.